Welcome to the Underdog Sniper Podcast. I'm your host, MGCovers. This is episode 48. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in. Sorry we missed last week. Last week was pure chaos for me. Personally, I'm in the process of moving, not only a traditional move, but like moving out of the country. And I was out of the country, and the trip, pretty much majority of last week, everything that could go wrong went wrong. I had flight problems. I had baggage problems. I had problems with my Airbnb. I had problems getting into the golf course where I was going to be a member at. It was just pure chaos, extremely frustrating. And so I do apologize, wasn't able to get a podcast, and I'll probably talk about that a little bit later, some of the things going on with me personally. But I will say this is that when you're away from sports betting and you have something going on, more times than not, it's better off to pass. Don't ever rush a play, or if it feels like, where you're going to rush and you don't normally, if you're doing something outside of the norm of your handicapping process, more times than not, it's best to pass. And then that's why it's important, whatever time or the process that you have, the way that you handicap, keep that the same all the time. Very important to do that. All right. So give the outline of this podcast. We're going to talk about ELF spaces. If you don't know what ELF spaces are, we'll explain that. And I'm going to give my reaction. And I've kind of come to terms with what's going on in the sports betting community and why I think it's important for me to move on from that and just to focus on my business and what I'm trying to do in the sports betting community. I'm also going to talk about NBA, NHL are back, and we'll talk about some tips on how to handicap that, as well as spring training for baseball has started. I actually ran my model. We'll talk about the results and kind of what I'm going to do with that, tracking it, and then what's going to consume the majority of this podcast. We're going to talk about soccer. And soccer is something I've tried to handicap literally 5 years and been unsuccessful. And the reason why I want to focus on soccer, it's a year-round sport. So if we can, quote, figure it out, make it profitable, it could be potentially the best sport that we have. And I had a major breakthrough, and I'm going to share that. And I think once you see this, it's going to be like so helpful, just a huge, huge advantage that you can have if you're going to handicap soccer, or making sure that when you're handicapping a sport, keeping an open mind to always think, is there a better way to do this? And that's kind of been my theme here, I guess, the last 6 months. You've never figured this business out. Nobody's ever figured it out. It changes, it evolves. So you as a handicapper, if you want to succeed and profit long-term, you have to change, you have to evolve, and always looking for areas that you can improve on. I've made this point on Instagram before. If you ask any professional athlete at elite level, like right now, especially like golfers, ask them, what are you working on right now? None of them will say, I'm playing great golf, I'm not working on anything. Or if you ask somebody in the NBA, what are you working on right now? All the greats are working on something to constantly improve and get better. And I'm no exception to that. And I've really made a commitment to that here in the last 6 months. All right. So let's talk about ELF spaces. If you don't know what ELF spaces are, ELF is a handicapper, and he brings on other guests, and sort of the premise, it's sort of like a Jerry Springer type environment, where originally he'll bring on, quote, fraudulent handicappers, some successful handicappers, and basically expose them. The overall, I think it actually does some good because it brings in a ton of viewers and people watch that. And I think now that the majority of a lot of the sports betting community are realizing, hey, the majority of people that are selling plays are fraudulent handicappers. They're not winning handicappers. They have no edge. They have no model. They have no clue about line movement, top down, etc. They're basically guessing at games, creating sports betting propaganda on Twitter. For example, they're just making up some arbitrary numbers. Hey, we're up 95 units in 3 days. You can alter some type of betting slip, post that on Instagram, post that on Twitter. People react to that, and then boom, jump into Discord and pay those people money. And so I think what he's doing is actually good for the community. And there's other handicappers other people that I follow now on Twitter. They're exposing a lot of these sports betting services that are, in essence, losing handicappers long term. So I think overall that's good for the community. However, the one thing that I'll have to accept, that if you're going to do what I do, which basically means my platform is education based. I want to teach people how to improve. I'll never be as big as the quote fraudulent handicappers, even though on the surface that would be unfair. Meaning if I'm a winning handicapper long term, I should have a really large business, right, on that perspective, but it's never going to be that way. And I have to accept that. And the majority of people that are attracted to my content, the people that consume my content, the reason that you're listening to this podcast right now is you're committed to improving and getting better. So what I'm saying is I usually catch people after they've been through that, after they maybe, purchased some handicappers, pigs, or just subscribe to the service and realize they're not getting any value. And hey, they're better off at least, taking a look at my content, learning, about what we do and how I teach the business in an effort to improve and potentially do this on their own. And even if they don't do it on their own, at least they're at a better advantage because they have access to my models and learning the correct process for handicapping. So at this point, I've accepted that, and that is the reality, and there's nothing I can do about it, and there's no need to sort of go down that rabbit hole and be consumed with that. But I'll still bring that up occasionally, which means like I'll use a couple of times on Twitter, I've posted where I've seen handicappers make, I've corrected their card, meaning the way they're handicapping is incorrect. And I've made those corrections. I'll still do that, but I'm not going to let this bother me at the state of the sports betting community the way it is. Because again, the people, if somebody says, hey, I want to learn the business the correct way, that's the people that I'm interested in becoming a client. Because again, the majority are not interested in improving. The majority of people want the quick fix. They just want to subscribe to a service, make $1 million in 2 days, which obviously I'm exaggerating, but I'm saying that's the mentality of the majority. And so I can't focus on that. And I have to focus on what's made me successful and also made the business successful. And that's teaching people the correct way to do this business. All right. So now let's move on to NBA. NHL has started back up. And I'll get some thoughts on that. The model for NBA looks really well. We went, it went 2-1 last night. You do want to give it a little bit of time to gather some new data. A lot of these teams are rested. I've talked about this before. Outside of an all-star break, just about the majority of sports, it's going to favor the underdog. The favorite will, quote, be overvalued. All of these teams are rested, well rested, and that will favor the dog. I think NHL, the first day back, dogs went 9-4 that first day back. The NBA, we played Brooklyn the other night. We had Brooklyn minus 17 against Philadelphia. They were plus 11. And I know I had clients play it on the money line at like plus 400, even better than that, plus 420. We played it taking the points at plus 11, and they pretty much was blowing out Philadelphia the majority of the game, and Philadelphia made a run there at the end. I think they won by 2. So could have easily lost it on the money line, but obviously covered with the points. So that's a very important point to make. If you're handicapping outside an all-star break, sometimes more than, if you really want to be super conservative, is just to wait, 3 or 4 days to gather some data so that you're using, quote, current data with the teams that are well rested, in addition to some of the previous data, so that it's a more representative sample of what's going to happen that day. Spring training for baseball. I have never ran my model for MLB. And if you're new, that's probably the best model I have. 35 units last year, 2 years ago, 47 units. It's a really solid model. So I'm starting to run it for spring training. And ironically, I ran it yesterday. I went 3-0, which was wild. And I think I ran it today. I think there's like 4 plays, several dogs on that. And I had to alter it some because, again, you don't have, most teams spring training have only played 2, 3, maybe 4 games max. So I've had to make a few adjustments to it, but I'm actually going to track it. And again, this goes back to the point I made early in the podcast, is that you always want to figure out, is there a better way to do something? Another example, you've got an NBA model that's successful. Have you tried that NBA model with NCAA basketball? You got an NFL model that's successful. Have you tried that model with college football? So always looking at different ways to expand and to grow. And even if you have a, quote, model that's successful, is there a better way to do it? And that's what I'm going to show you in soccer. If you got an ROI of, 5% or maybe even 2%, is there something that you can alter to increase that ROI so that you're not putting out as much capital and can make more money? So super excited about that. All right, let's dive into soccer. And I'm going to pull this spreadsheet up here. And again, soccer is something that I've struggled with. I've never made soccer profitable long term. Never. And probably the only sport I can say that about out of all major sports. Been profitable. NFL, college football, NBA, NCAA basketball, baseball, NHL, never soccer. And so this is something that has really intrigued me. And what I was originally doing, we'll look at this over here on this side over here. What I was originally doing was I was playing all dog via the model, and only dogs that are plus 120 or greater. The problem with that is these underdogs just don't cash enough to make this profitable. So you can look here. All right, so this is when I made changes, 215. So basically the last 2 weeks, I've changed up the model to include favorites. But just to prove a point, if I had handicapped, this is the way I was handicapping. Look over there on the left where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plays, and it goes 2 and 4. And you look over here at the right, that's what we had made, 0.11 units. So the problem with soccer is, granted, if you don't play favorites, you eliminate all that heavy juice, and you can, quote, still be profitable. You can be profitable at a lower win percentage. However, those underdogs just don't cash enough. And when I was tracking this before, I think we had like a 30-game sample. I've shared that on social. Some of you may remember that, but we got it to 5 units, and I was like, okay, this could potentially work. And then it went straight back to 0. So important point I want to make about handicapping, and I've talked about this before, whatever sport that you do, you want to make sure that the majority of time you're handicapping the entire pie of the statistical property of that sport. And what I mean by that, let me give you an example. In Major League Baseball, favorites win 60% of the time. Same in NHL. Underdogs cash 40% of the time. So the reason most people are unsuccessful in Major League Baseball and NHL, they play a majority of favorites. So if you've got 10 games in Major League Baseball on a given day, underdog's going to win almost 50% of the time. And that's why I've always been attracted to those sports and done extremely well in Major League Baseball and NHL in the past. Well, part of the reason that I'm struggling with soccer, in my opinion, or not really opinion, it's basically fact, is I'm not playing any favorites, specifically heavy favorites. Heavy favorites in soccer do cash at a pretty high percentage. And again, this is a math-based business. So whatever your average odds that you're wagering, if your average odds are minus 120, right, which converts into about a 55% win percentage. If you can win at 60% of the time and your average odds are minus 125, you're going to be profitable. If your average odds are plus 100, you're playing all dogs. We did this 2 years ago in Major League Baseball. We played all money line dogs plus 120 or greater. Again, they're naturally, based on the statistical property, going to cash 40% of the time. We got it to 53%. So we hit 53% of dogs plus 120 or greater, and that was, 47 units, had a great year. So it is possible to do that. Everything is math-based, but I think I've traditionally wanted to only handicap or play juice up to minus 150. That's just generally what I'm comfortable with. Minus 150 converts into a 60% chance of winning. And so once you go beyond that, you play in some, pretty heavy juice. But what I've realized, and you'll see in this back test, is that those heavy favorites, minus 300, minus 400 cash at a very high percentage. And again, it goes back to, if the numbers work, this is a math-based business. So if the numbers work, it's going to be profitable. So here's what I did. Based on the model, if you look over here to the left, I would normally just play the dog. So what I did was, even if it was a heavy favorite, I included that in the back test. So you can see here we have a sample of 28 games. And you look at some of this juice here, minus 312, minus 205, minus 435. And you say, well, that's crazy to risk 4 units to win 1. What's interesting about the minus 400s, all of the anything above minus 400 I think we went 4-0. That was a win. That was a win. That was a win. That was a win. So all the minus 400 plays. Now, they could have lost, right? Just like anything else, but they do win at a high percentage. So handicapping all of these favorites, we went 18-10 plus 3.55 units. That was 64% win ratio. Now, let's talk about ROI and average odds, because this is important. So there is the average odds, minus 126. So that converts into a 55% win percentage, which means my break-even point, we're averaging minus 126. If we hit 55%, we would be even. Meaning, if you go back to this number here, right here, if we were 55%, we would be at 0 units. But we hit 64%. So therefore, we turned a profit of 3.55 units. And then the ROI, I generally have higher ROIs than most, but 5.5% ROI is still a respectable, decent ROI. It's not like it's 1% where you're having to lay a considerable amount of capital in order to turn a profit. So basically, ROI just means your percentage return on investment is the actual name for that. So that's lower than normal, but that's still pretty good. 5% is 5%. And then when you look at it in terms of, this was basically 2 weeks of data. So another sort of weird way to do this, and you look down here at the bottom where it says 3.55 units. Let's say if we're averaging 0.55 units, even if we average that a month, this number times 12, that would get us at, if we just average 3.55 units a month, that would get us at 42 units a year on a year-round sport. So that's why I'm extremely attracted to soccer and determined to figure out a way to make this profitable. Now, most of the people listening to this podcast are pretty smart, pretty sharp, myself included. And obviously, let's say we have a wager today that's minus 323, and I think we actually do, and that wager loses. We would basically lose all of that profit, or pretty much a majority of it. So what I don't even know how I did this. But anyway, so what I did was I looked at, so let me take a look at the first half numbers, which means playing teams on the first half line. So they have to win. It can't be a tie. They have to win the first half, meaning it has to be 1-0, 2-0, whatever. And look at how drastic it changes. So if you go back to this sheet over here, look at these numbers here. We'll look at the first one. Arsenal was a minus 312. That was the line. Arsenal first half line, minus 133. It's huge. It's a huge difference. It cuts that juice down drastically. And I've never even looked at this. Again, going back to the point I make is you always have to be open to an understanding, is there a better way to do this where we could increase the ROI? And we will. Some of you already can see it if you're watching this video. It's up to 9.15% ROI. But I didn't realize how drastic that would reduce the juice. Now, even in NHL regulation line, it's generally about 50 cents, meaning like if the line is, say, minus 199, if you play that team in regulation, it's probably going to be, minus 145, minus 150, somewhere in that neighborhood. But taking a heavy favorite in soccer and playing them to win the first half, it drastically reduces that. So just going through this, if you go back, look at the old way, minus 312, minus 204, minus 435, minus 192, plus 304, plus 210. I didn't do anything to the dogs, which means if it was a dog, I didn't play the dog, or I didn't play any of these. I'm just tracking it, meaning like I'm not going to play, if a team is plus 305, I'm not going to play them in the first half. I'm just going to play them, to win the game. Minus 143, minus 115, minus 435. Now look at the first half lines. Minus 133, plus 100, minus 169, plus 102, plus 204, plus 210, plus 131, plus 140, minus 164. So isn't that wild? You had Liverpool on 216 was minus 135. You play them on the first half line, minus 164. And so what that does, now, this will decrease the win percentage. So you can see here it went, instead of 18 and 10, now it goes 15 and 13, which is 54%. I think it's like 53.8 or something. So it rounds out to 54%. Units are relatively the same, plus 3.04. But what's interesting is take a look at your ROI. So we increased the ROI to 9.15%. We basically double the ROI. And what's interesting doing it this way, look at the average odds. Average odds doing it this way, plus 116. And then playing all that heavy juice was minus 126. So doing it this way, we're hitting 54% average odds plus 116. We're going to be profitable. And another ancillary benefit of this, obviously, in just realistic terms, let's say we have a play, or let me show you that. I want to show you the play for today is AS Roma. Let me see if I can pull up their line. I think they're like minus 3 something. Flash score. And also did, with this model, I actually changed this model around, and I may need to make a few changes. I just increased my line. So normally this would have been like a minus 150 line. So I made some changes so this numbers actually increase so that it looks a lot more realistic. And I might change it again, but it's really a sort of a criterion-based model, which means even though this is minus 261, and I'll show you the sports betting line here in a second. I can't pull it. They're minus 357. Point being, minus 357. That's the, one way I looked at playing it. Now, if we play them on the first half line, this is wild. First half line, minus 141. Is that not wild? So that drastically reduces. So for example, if we were to play AS Roma today, minus 357, you lose all of our profit that we had made based on the other tracker. Whereas playing just the first half line, minus 141, it loses, we would still be profitable. So in my opinion, I think the best way to do this is to play first half lines in soccer. And I'm sure there's somebody out there that, quote, plays or could, I'm not sure, that plays all dogs for soccer and is profitable. But, for me, that's been difficult, and I haven't been able to, quote, get over that hump. But handicapping it this way, we're actually playing, quote, heavy favorites, but sort of a backdoor approach. Instead of playing them full game, we're just playing them in the first half. Now, I'll show you something else that's pretty wild doing it this way. I can't remember which team this was. But what happened is, because obviously you'll say, well, you'll lose some because maybe, the match is tied at the first half. True, but also you're going to win some, meaning like the team's going to be 1-up at halftime, and then maybe the opposing team gets a goal in the second half and it ends in a draw. So you see what I'm saying? So it's going to kind of be a little bit of a counterbalance. Obviously, the win percentage is going to be lower, but your ROI is going to be higher and you're taking on less risk. So super fascinating to this. And I'm telling you, I feel really, really, really extremely positive about this moving forward. This model, the way that I've tweaked it, I think is really good. And I think this can profit long term. I really honestly believe it, because again, these heavy juice teams, there's a reason they're minus 312, minus 435. They win at a very high. They win a lot, but you don't want to risk that, because let's say you had minus 400 plays today. Could you lose both of those? Absolutely. Now, instead of being up 3 units, now you're down minus 5 units. Whereas if you play both of them on the first half line, you lose both, you basically at even. So first half line is probably going to be the way to go with soccer moving forward. Again, I'm not saying it's the only way, but based on my model, my experience, and everything that I went through with soccer, I think this is, the way to go with soccer. So we'll continue to track this. I'm not ready to, quote, do this live per se, But your play for today is going to be AS Roma, so hopefully they can pull it out and win it at minus 141 first half line. So anyway, so that's a wrap for this week's podcast. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in, and talk to you guys throughout the week. Peace.